Welcome to Making the Invisible Visible, Intersections of First Gen and Poverty on Campus. My name is Tara. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a First Gen Steering Committee member and the room host for this breakout session. And it is now my pleasure to turn things over to your presenters for today.
Thank you, Tara, for starting us off today. And thank you all for coming to our panelists. My name is Minerva Munoz. I use she, her pronouns. I direct the TRIO Student Support Services program here at the U of M. But I've been a gopher since 1999 and was a first gen student who came from a very poor background here on campus. And I think that's really guided how I do my work and where I put my energy, where my passions really lie in service of students here on this campus. And it's why I serve on the committee to help bring this together. So to start, I'd like to have the panelists go around and introduce themselves also. Your name, your pronouns, title on campus, anything else that you'd like to share that you feel is relevant for this space today. I'll just name one person, and then if you can call on another panelist to keep it moving, and then we'll get dive into a little bit of data and start off the questions. So I'll start with Becca.
Thank you, Minerva. My name is Becca Layton. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a health promotion specialist at Boynton Health. So my work is really focused on mainly addressing food insecurity and the root causes of food insecurity among college students on campus. And so there's lots of intersections with lots of different student identities, and first generation definitely being one of those. So thank you. And then I will pass it over to Sarah. You're right next to me.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Sarah Gustafson-Dombeck. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm really honored to be in community with you all. I am a care program. I work in the care program in student affairs as a care manager. And my student identity was a non-traditional student and from a working class family. And so really self-supporting. So I was kind of older and graduated. And so I really kind of recognized and tied to this community. Kayla.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla Cory. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the assistant manager for the Health Professions Pathway Initiative and the Pre-Health Student Resource Center. And I am also an advisor for the Trio McNair Scholars Program. I identified as a first gen and low income student in my undergrad and my graduate program. And a lot of that work, or a lot of my identity and my experiences influence the work I do with my students. And with that said, I will pass it over to Steve.
Okay, thank you. I'm Steve Cisneros. I use he, him pronouns. I am first generation, so first in my family to go to college, including my two older brothers. I work at the University of Minnesota as a director of the President's Emerging Scholars. We admit about 500 students, a little more every year, most of whom are first gen, low income, and BIPOC. Happy to be here, and it's nice to see some familiar faces.
I'm Susan Warfield. I'm the director of the Student Parent Help Center. The Student Parent Help Center is a program that assists formerly undergraduate student parents exclusively, but in recent years, we've onboarded graduate and professional students. The student parent population nationally is very heavily represented with BIPOC population, first gen and low income, and non-traditionally aged students. I started my career here at the University of Minnesota 22 years ago in General College, which was an former college that was the entry point for many first gen college students here to the U. And I myself was low income, poor, rural farm kid, financed both college degrees on my own and first gen student myself. So this again is very near and dear to my heart as well.
Thank you, Susan. So I named that I was the director of the TRIO SSS program. And for those of you who are new to what TRIO programs are, we have Kayla here that's representing McNair. And they were previewed a little in the opening welcome note from Dr. Michael Rodriguez. But TRIO SSS has existed on this campus since 1976. TRIO programs have existed on this campus since 1966, starting with the pre-college program Upward Bound that was helping to pipeline students here. My program specifically is working with current undergrad specifically NHS enrolled students, so students who were new freshmen coming into college, so not transfer students. And really our whole existence here is to help people overcome poverty. That is what TRIO exists for and what it was designed to do. Education being that vehicle to help people do that. Over time on this campus, what we're seeing regarding first gen and students who represent low-income backgrounds is slowly a declining number of those students who are representing both identities. So in the last, we had in 2017, we had students on this campus who represented both first gen and who were Pell eligible, which is the metric I'm using in this instance to paint a picture of low-income eligibility, but I will name that this doesn't necessarily constitute the totality of those who are low income for a variety of reasons, including, some students become financial aid ineligible for a year, right? And for various reasons that data may not be captured. DACA students are not always captured in these metrics. And so we do have other students, I would assume some international students who may not be able to apply for the Pell Grant are represented there. But we had a rate of, in 2018, 12.2%. In 2020, as of last year, we were at 10.8%. And the year before that, we were at 11.2%. So from, the last few years, we continue to see a slow decline in that number, which can lead to further invisibility. And when you think about like putting it into very real numbers, what is the disparity looking like? Like when we're talking students who are Pell eligible and first gen versus students who are not Pell eligible and first gen, what are the differences, right? And I looked at that very metric. I was grant writing in the last year and a half, looking specifically at 2018 data. And at that point in time of our enrolled students, first gen non-Pell eligible students had a family income, which was the adjustable gross income of $161,300. Students who were Pell eligible and first gen had a family income of $24,284. So even though the number may be shrinking, right? Like the differences are really stark in the lived experiences and realities that our students who hold these two identities are facing on this campus. Big Ten is the U of M is one of the most expensive campuses to eat within the Big Ten. How are our students who are intersecting with both of those identities and don't have, access to expendable money to spend in the dining hall going to pay for that, right? And so those are the things that I very much take into account when I'm trying to do our work within TRIO. And the other thing to name is that from a structural point, the U of M does not have a resource space specifically targeting this demographic, right? Aside from TRIO SSS, which is federal grant money designed to subsidize the work of the university has not absorbed, right, that as a priority population at this point to add administrative structural resources. So that means that we got to be grassroots with this, right? And I see, and that's where this panel is coming into play, is that a lot of the work that they're doing explicitly and not explicitly are serving our students that and are targeting our students that are first gen and low income, and therefore serving them. And so I bring them to you today for those purposes to share their narratives. And with that, I will be quiet and just start asking questions. So to get us moving, I have about 5 questions that I'll see how they play out, and then we'll open them up to the rest of you all to ask questions as well. If things pop up in the chat, like follow-up, feel free to use that. I'm gonna rely a little on Tara to help highlight if anything from the chat needs to come to the surface. So first question, poverty in higher education is often overlooked. Can you please describe your work on campus and how it intersects with serving students who are both first generation and low income students? And anyone is welcome to take that.
I can start. Our student parents on the undergraduate side, that's predominantly what I'm going to be speaking of, are almost all zero EFC on their financial aid, meaning they don't have any expected contribution because they have almost no income. And that's across the board. And that's also nationally true of student parents. We have many single moms that are not only zero EFC, but they are supporting their children independently of anybody else's income. So it is first and foremost in our mind. We, because of that, have over the years developed quite a significant multiple pools of emergency grant assistance, which we do give out on a regular basis and keep refilling those stockpiles because it is so needed by our student population. We also sponsor childcare assistance grants. We have one that is supported by U fees, the student fees, and one that much larger that is a state of Minnesota childcare assistance grant. And that is kind of like the air students breathe. If you've got kiddos, most of them are younger aged and need childcare. And so that is another source of assistance that we offer.
Thank you, Susan. Go ahead,
Hi,
Sarah.
Yeah, hello. So what was mentioned before in the opening session, the quote from Bell Hooks, that we do not talk about the social class differences and impact on students, especially first gen and low income. You know, I think about kind of depending on the size of like the schools, like K-12 schools that a student may come from, or the, community college, when they're transferring to the U, it's a very large institution. And it's also a primary white institution. And navigating all of the resources can be really complex. So we recognize that even, for anybody, it can be just kind of this really big place to navigate. So my office, which is the CARE program, like I said, in student affairs, we basically, I was kind of thinking of it like a lighthouse, really, just like for students to know that somebody like cares about them, and then just to learn from the students, learn from their experiences, what barriers they've experienced, and then what resources could be helpful. And we are a 2-person office on this, 55,000 student campus. So we do, what we can with the resources that we have. So really trying to, share what students may not be aware of that's, available on campus. So that's really what we do. And, we try to reach as many students as we can. We often will get referrals from faculty or staff. Students end up in our office. And then sometimes we get student referrals as well. So self-referral, just to kind of, share that there is support out there for them.
Okay, everyone. So bear with me. I'm in a dual role. I work for the Trio McNair Scholars Program, and I also work for the Pre-L Student Resource Center. So I have to talk in 2 different capacities here, but a lot of the work between the 2 offices overlaps. For the Trio McNair Scholars Program, we primarily serve first generation college students in addition to students who are low income. And we also serve students who are considered underrepresented by race and ethnicity. These students are we're supporting them on their journey to graduate school to earn PhDs and also master's degrees. And then on the pre-health side, it's essentially the same thing, working with BIPOC students, rural students, first-gen students, and Pell eligible students. But instead of the graduate school component, we're working to support them to pursue their health science degrees. So on both sides, on the health side, we are creating a health professions pathway initiative where we are partnering actually with PES, Steve's program, to run a pilot program this upcoming fall to support the students, as I mentioned earlier, pursuing their degrees, supporting them in their undergraduate degree, and also setting them up for success in their health profession program. So a lot of things related to career exploration, in addition to talking about finances and financial literacy on how they can fund those opportunities. And so that's kind of where the intersection between the first gen identity and the low income identity intersect between both of my jobs.
Steve or Rebecca?
Yeah, I can go. I just want to acknowledge there's also a question in the chat, so we can come back to that.
Okay.
I'm Steve Cisneros, President's Emerging Scholars. So we're a merit-based scholarship program, and we are also an equal opportunity educational program. And so that's how we've identified ourselves in the ways that we serve our students. So we've been around since 2013. I actually, before working for President's Emerging Scholars, worked closely with Minerva in a bridge program. Prior to that, I worked as an academic advisor in General College with Susan, and the TRIO program there with Student Success Services. PES came out of ATS and came out of the merger of General College with CEHD. There's a long history there. But in short, I've got 7 years of data. I don't have all 9 years of data to speak to. But over time, our average Pell Grant number of students is about 59, 60%. So we have about, of those 500 students that we admit every year, about 60% of those students receive the Pell Grant. And you heard our speakers this morning, if you were there, talk about how that can be an indicator of income. It doesn't necessarily include all the other pieces around poverty. And then about 65 to 70% of our students every year are first gen. So some of the things that we do to support them, we have a scholarship program for our students. So every student coming in gets $1,000, no questions asked, you just get it. Everyone is eligible, the exception of athletes, which make up about 10% of our program. And that's regardless of income. So again, it's merit-based. We're looking at students and thinking about how they're coming into the institution and what the merit is that they bring. And then in the last year of study, so in the fourth year, students get another $1,000. And that's based on, if they've met our program expectations. So those are meeting with a peer mentor and attending our fall conference, et cetera. And we really try not to tie strings to that money. It's very difficult for a student not to receive the full $1,000, and there's a reason for that. If we really think about equity and what is equitable and what is the right thing to do, and if we can say that as an institution to be ready for our students and to be serving students from an equity cognitive lens, that is to say that we understand that there are mismatches in opportunities and preparation and systemic barriers, then there really ought not to be strings tied to things if our premise is that this is the equitable way to serve students. And so that's part of our thought around the way that we do scholarships. Then what we've also done is, unfortunately, not all of our students make it to the fourth year. So if we've got a budget of $500,000 for 500 students at $1,000 each for the first year and the last year, and we've got a 60, 70% graduation rate, depending on you're looking at 4-year, 5-year, 6-year, then there's money left over. And so through asking time and time again, and finally getting a positive response, we've got some extra money that we use for engagement scholarships. And so those are things for students who want to do study abroad, national student exchange, they want to have unpaid internships or unpaid research opportunities. So the things that students might put on a resume, for example, or experiences that might bolster their next steps or their 4 years at the university, but might be limited in terms of how do you pay for it. And so we're able to award about $20,000 a year for students to do things in terms of engagement. And then what I was talking about earlier is helping to shift the lens in which we view our students. And so we've really done a lot of work around shaping that equity cognitive lens, and not only for our institutional partners and high school counselors, but also for students, so that students understand themselves as having these inherent qualities that make them strong candidates that I don't want to say guarantee, but close to guarantee that they're going to be successful here at the institution because they've already got some of these qualities that have gotten them this far. And so really thinking through what does it mean to be a student and what are those skills, attributes, and just of ways of doing business that got you here in the first place. So I'm sorry if I took up too much time, but I'm going to stop now.
Thank you, Steve. Your office does a lot. So I can see how like really pointing that out can take some time. Becca, did you want to join in on this question?
I'll just say really briefly that, yeah, in my role, I provide the resources to students, the flashy ones that you all probably know about, the food pantry, meal sharing, all of that. But really a big part of my job is to work on creating systems change at the university level and even beyond that, that make it easier for students to meet their basic needs and to thrive. So having conversations with administrators and decision makers about this changing demographic of students, or to really, I mean, the conversation earlier was talking about understanding your own class and things like that. So making sure that people who are in these high level positions who maybe had a very different experience going to school, not as a first generation student or as a student that did have support from their family, what it looks like today for honestly the majority of our students, and how can we create a system that serves those students and helps them thrive.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. There were some questions that have come up in the chat. I know, Kayla, I think that the question pertaining to you can be woven into something later. Steve, at some point in your contributions, I don't know if you can address maybe some of the admissions work or who's getting access and why. I'm not sure if you're on that side of the house. I have my opinions that I don't always want to share publicly. So I'll move on, and as we move, if we can try to weave those in, that would be great. But in your experience, what are the unique challenges that first-gen students who are low income or who are coming from impoverished backgrounds are facing while pursuing a college degree at this institution?
So, like I mentioned in our work in the CARE program, like I said, that we're really privileged to meet with students and really hear their story. That's really kind of the crux of our work, is like transparency, and then also learning from students, not having kind of assumptions about what students, maybe what barriers or struggles they may have, but just to kind of share, and this probably is not novel information, but that students, for a lot of the students that I meet with and that are seeking support, school is not the #1 priority for them, because they do have kind of their own goals, and it's a priority kind of in the big sense, but they are balancing other things, right? So these are students who are, working multiple jobs. They may be commuter students. They may be doing the heavy lifting in their home and, contributing to the family income, being a caregiver. And then two, another kind of barrier has been having access to care that aligns with their identity. So maybe no insurance, or insurance that is financially straining. So if they are kind of experiencing some stressors, some trauma, maybe some mental health impacts that they've experienced for a long time, and then trying to get some help, that can be a barrier. I think access to community, like where can these students feel connected with other students who maybe have a shared identity? As we know, when we look at kind of the well-being wheel, it's not just having your basic needs met, which again is another struggle, but having who's my support system, who are the people I'm talking to. So when we always kind of want to learn from students, because if they aren't connected, then I think about the partner offices, all the people that are on this conference today, of like, where can we connect you, just to make sure, again, that you feel that you do have a home, even though this is a really big place. And then I think about too, some of the systemic challenges related to even to like the financial aid. We talked about that, where if a student, is a student really understanding this is how much money you got to last this many years at the U, to pay for food, to pay for where you live, to pay for, all of the expenses that come with it. And just to have, I think that's a need really, to have students really understand that, so that they're making decisions, if they have to withdraw from a class, or if they're on a scholarship, is the scholarship so restrictive that they can't even take like a quarter off or a semester off to kind of take care of themselves? So that's a barrier too. So those are just some things that I think that they're kind of balancing while trying to balance school. And let's not even talk about COVID, right? Like, hey, we're shifting all of a sudden to online learning, and you have to have a laptop, and you have to have access, and you have to have this and this. So yeah, but that's what we've learned so far.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I want to specifically like just jump off really quickly, and I'll invite Susan into this to contribute, but that naming of this cohort of students, right? You know, even only to 10.8% are first gen and low income, right, in 2020, but about 20-something% were Pell eligible, right? So these cohort of students, they don't get to just make the same academic decisions that other students get to make, because their existence and academic health on campus is interwoven with this handcuff, the financial aid, which is a beauty, right? Like, it's a beautiful component to get and have access to the resources to pay for college, but it also does come at cost for students. So like when institutions making decisions around things like SN policy grading and not suspending students, right? There's certain classes of students who are differentially impacted by those decisions than students who are not dependent on financial aid. And so with that, I'll move it over to Susan. Thank you for that, Sarah.
And I'm going to jump right on those points that you both made, because I'll start with financial aid myself. When I mentioned the emergency assistance grants that we have, they're wonderful, but they're oftentimes, and this is not a criticism of the U, this is a federal issue, but parents, despite all the blah, blah, blah about how when they have children, there's other augmentations that are done on their financial aid, they are not realistic augmentations for people that have a couple of kiddos they're raising. So I frequently have the unfortunate situation where I'm sitting on thousands of dollars of emergency assistance grants, and some low income, zero EFC mom can't pay her rent that month, or has a food shortage because she couldn't stretch her food stamps enough, or EBT card now. And I can't give them any of our raised money because they have no unmet need in their financial aid, and there's no way to move that up or down. And talk about losing sleep at night over something like that. And so there's a fairness issue there about when people have family dependents, that we really need to, on a national level, reassess that budget that we're looking at, because I don't know who thinks they can, they get a couple of $100 extra on their rent assessment for their housing budget that nowhere near reflects what somebody in an urban area is looking at. The second thing that Sarah also brought up is we constantly talk about time poverty with our population of student parents, because they often are not only having another full-time job as a parent, which anybody has kiddos, it's probably a full-time job for each child that you have in your house. But they also are typically working some hours. They're Uber driving, or they have some side gig that they're doing to bring money in. And they have no extra time. They're studying at midnight when the kids settle down and they've cleaned the house. And so they're exhausted when they're studying. They have a very hard crunch sometimes with their own classmates, because often they are squeezed out of group projects because they can't meet when the other students on campus can meet. Or before we were virtual, they were asked to come to campus when most of our students don't even live in family housing. The predominant number of the undergrads are already settled out in the community when they come back to school. And so then you have wellness poverty. You have students that are exhausted, and, goodness help them if they happen to be one of the ones that's pregnant and just had a newborn and they're up all night and having to manage finals. And despite all that, they're astoundingly committed and successful students in most cases. So.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. You brought up a lot of really great points, and there's a comment in the section, or in the comment section here. This is making me think about how we support or fail to support students who don't have legal dependents but are responsible for some level of caretaking, whether it's younger siblings, parents, extended family, right? And so that responsibility, absolutely, for direct dependence, and culturally, right, for a lot of our students, and especially during this pandemic time, I would say actually absence of this pandemic time, first gen low income students also intersect with being commuters and are often living at home and navigating family life and younger siblings and home responsibilities. And none of that is factored into the equation. And I think Susan is absolutely correct, right? Like how EFC is calculated, how low income is determined by the federal government, that's based off of like a 1950s equation of what it costs to live in the world, right? And so I would even surmise that, you know, the cost of attendance on our campus, is that keeping up with the cost of living in Minneapolis, right? Like, are those things permitting our students to not just live as U of M students really poor while they're here with us? And so I do think like some of the metrics and institutional, even beyond our institution, but higher ed as a whole, the functions and systems we use are dated. Kayla?
Yeah, there's a lot that I reflected on that and how it reflected into my life and things that I had to take care of my younger siblings, not only when I was in high school, like applying to college and not being able to participate in certain extracurricular activities because I was taking care of my siblings while my mom was working her second job. So there's a lot of responsibility that comes with being a first gen student if you have siblings and are also from a low income background. But in terms of the students that I serve, and Leslie, this kind of touches a little bit on your question of like, what are the challenges that pre-health students face in comparison to grad students that are planning to apply to graduate school. Actually see a lot of overlap in the challenges that they face. And that's where my role works out when I'm kind of split between these two offices. I see that we have a student advisory board on the pre-health side of all current health students here at the University of Minnesota. And they talk about things related to financial literacy, about how do you fund these post-second or after your bachelor's degree, how do you fund your MD degree? How do you fund your PhD? And then a lot of the cases, especially with the pre-health side, is that you are taking out a lot of loans in order to get that MD degree, that nursing degree, that OT, PT degree. And a lot of the times that goes against the thoughts and beliefs of certain students that come from low income backgrounds, is that, you know, like that's not something that they want to do. They think that having this degree is really important, but also talking and having conversations with them. Okay, like this is the case, but you can take out loans in smart ways. So having more financial literacy on being smart of how you're taking out the loans. Also, there's the cost of supplemental fees, of the cost of the application itself, the cost of interviews, the cost of the down deposits to reserve your spots. There's things that students can't afford, and applying to health degrees and graduate degrees is expensive. And so that's one thing with McNair, is that we're able to, in most cases, our McNair scholars, they get a fee waiver when they're applying to graduate schools. And so like when I applied to my master's degree, I didn't have to pay the $75 fee. And you can imagine if students are applying to multiple places, that racks up over time. And that is a huge cost to them. With the deposits, students have to pay $500 to reserve their spot in some of the health schools. And so there was one case where a student, their family took their rent money and put down money to hold their spot so they can go and get their health degree. And so there are cases where I think the schools themselves need to adjust what they're expecting from students, especially first gen and low income students, because these are financial barriers that are preventing them from going on. And that's something that we try to talk with students about a little bit ahead of time, of like, hey, here's what to expect, here's what you can do to prepare for it. But not everybody has the chance to build up a savings account for those needs, or not needs, but those instances. Also in related to prepping, like the cost for preparing for the GRE, the cost for preparing for the MCAT is incredibly expensive. So in the Pre-Health Student Resource Center, we have an initiative going on called Donate Your Test Prep. So we're having pre-health or actual health students donating their already used like books, materials, all that kind of stuff to the Pre-Health Student Resource Center, where then we can redistribute it to students who are first generation or a part of our health profession pathway initiative. But there are other ways that you could support students of like holding hours where they can study together and answer each other's questions. I think having that community, kind of what Sarah was talking about, where they can understand that they're not the only ones that are going through this, that they're not at fault for this, and that they have those shared experiences with each other. That was a big valuable component to my undergrad with McNair, was having that community of like, hey, you're not crazy. Like, you're not the only one going through this. We got this. We're going to support each other. One last thing, also the opportunity to pay, having paid research opportunities, having paid internships. That's what students need. They need to be paid in order to get these experiences. They cannot afford to work a full-time job in addition to doing an internship or a research experience. And it needs to be an equitable pay, making sure that we are not paying our low-income students less than some more of these affluent programs. So that said, I'll stop.
Yeah, speaking of pay, thank you, Kayla, for sharing all of your experiences and wisdom. Speaking of pay, you know, something that we've done for a while, I think I've got similar stories of what Susan was talking about, where students are really struggling. You know, we've got 3 times as many commuters as the rest of the undergraduate population. So you add commuting with, you know, all the other challenges that come with being first gen low income, but then all the challenges of getting to campus, getting to work, not being able to work on campus because you can work somewhere else at a restaurant or something else for a lot more money. And those hours aren't always, you know, the most ideal hours for trying to also learn and go to school. So thinking about, I see, you know, Will advocating for student pay increases in our departments, but also thinking about when we ask students to do things. So we want students to be on a panel. We want students to come to an event. We want them to host a table, whether it's for our space or for someone else's. And we're often tapped for that. What we started doing quite a time ago is paying students for that time. And so if your office says, hey, Steve, Will, Miriam, whoever, someone in our office, could you round up 5 or 6 students to come speak to a donor, to speak to table at an event? We'll offer that opportunity to our students, and we'll offer that to pay them. So we offer it to our staff. We pay our staff to go to those things. And we just think that's the right thing to do. It's their time, it's their expertise, and it ought to be compensated. I'm also happy to see a lot of places on campus are increasing pay to $15 an hour. We know that, you know, that's becoming state and city law. University does not have to comply, but doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. And so how do we find ways to have, you know, sometimes tough conversations with folks to say, yeah, you know, we can look at this from a zero sum or a scarcity model. But if we know one thing about higher education is that inputs don't always equal outputs in a one-to-one. You know, one of the things I learned in one of my last classes was, you know, you think about the, you know, institutions of higher education, and it's kind of like playing soccer. This is one of the analogies in one of the books that we read, playing soccer on a field that's always moving. You know, think about a field that's sitting on a fulcrum, and, you know, an input does not always equal an output. It's not like a factory. We're not putting raw material in and getting precise outputs that we can know exactly it's going to turn out. So to say that to pay students more is going to lead to this one thing, I don't know that we know that for sure. And so if it's the right thing to do, and we know that we can come at things from an abundance mindset, then let's do it, and then let's figure out the rest later. Just because there's one possibility that paying students more money is going to cause a problem doesn't mean that we can't figure out a way to do that. And so like I said, I'm happy to see, the $15 an hour coming through places on campus. I think sometimes we look at policy and say, well, that's the policy and our hands are tied. But to Dean Rodriguez's point this morning, if we're truly all in community with each other, we're all connected, then we also have to be able to have those tough conversations and to be able to have conflict and to be okay with conflict and to be okay with saying, I don't think this is right. And it's nothing against a person or an office or what have you. But good often comes from conflict because it's folks pushing back and it's asking tough questions. And we've got to be able to, as individuals and as an institution, we have to have that space and that time and the permission to have that conflict. Speaking on a personal level, there's also conflict that happens within each of us. And so as an example, a former student who we're connected on social media, a lot of our students connect with us on social media, recently got one of those emergency grants and decided to go on a trip to, I don't know, somewhere sunny, beautiful beach, cold winter Minnesota here, and the students out on a beach. And, I had to check myself because, I'm thinking to myself, my first reaction, my gut reaction is, why did the student use emergency money to go to a beach? And I had to think about that, and I had to really check my own privilege, my own sense of self, and my perspective. I don't know where his money came from. I don't know what it was that he needed, and it's not up to me to decide. It's not for me to decide how anyone spends their money, and that's a tough conversation. I could talk more about that, but I think you get the idea of, no one is in charge of judging and holding anyone to any certain parameters or rules around what it means to be in poverty or poor or low income.
Yeah. No, thank you, Steve. That had me thinking about in some earlier comments, in my earlier pre-college career working with the TRIO Upward Bound program, it would be that senior year struggle, how expensive it was for our seniors who wanted to go into college, all those upfront costs. And so, prom happens around the same time as the enrollment deadline and the housing deadline and all these things. And so, I'd have to really stop my own internalized thoughts in the shame of poverty, but also my team, and have complex conversations about where these students are spending their money. They're like, so they went to prom, but they can't afford their enrollment deposit. Yeah, they should be permitted to have a life of dignity and fun and exist in a space where they get the same, chance to enjoy high school as everyone else and have those momentous moments, right? And to Steve's point, right? Like the vacation could have been paid for a year ago and being predetermined, and a financial obstacle came in within that year. And now, there's a predicament, right? It's not like, you prepay for something, you can always get that money back and cancel the trip, right? And so I just don't think also, like, we don't know where that money's coming from. And I mean, when I got to middle class life, all the middle class people were like, vacation this, vacation that, we need to vacation. And so there's like a culture of vacationing that's also expected of our students once they traverse poverty. Let this kid live his life. But I wanted to permit, were there any other contributions to that question before we move on? And also naming, I think we only have about 5 more minutes. I'm going to invite the panelists. There were 3 other questions. Is there anything that's calling to you that you want to leave as a final word for the attendees in this audience around, or in this workshop around the work you do and as it relates to first-time low-income students on this campus?
I just wanted to say something that's really hitting me right now is I just finished a whole webinar on social capital for student parents, and all of the stuff we're talking about. It just strikes me whenever I do anything like this, and this applies to other non-parenting first-gen low-income students, is how often I have to find workaround suggestions for experiences that other students get to have all the time. You know, study abroad. You can't recommend an internship because it's unpaid and they need to be working. You know, you can't say do volunteer work to build your resume because that's giving up work. So just like the vacation, the more lighter, fluffier experiences they don't get to have, maybe it's just a constant, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And even those of us that are helpers have to rig experiences for them that can happen. We've had a few students go to study abroad with their kids, and it was the most miraculous thing ever. 2 generations impacted. That ought to be the regular thing. That there, we ought to be sending parents abroad all the time with their kids. So
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I'm envisioning that as like as a possibility, like really reframing my brain, because I don't know that if I was working with a single parent or a student that was a parent, that would be something that I would be offering as an opportunity, right? Or suggesting as a thing they could do. So thank you for that.
Awesome.
I wrote in the chat that rig is a very accurate word that Susan used, because I think a lot of the work that we do is workarounds. How do we find a workaround because of the system that we operate within that is designed for folks with more privilege? And, you know, I did see a good meme yesterday, privilege. It's not what you have, it's what you don't have to get over or through. And so it's sometimes hard to see your privilege because we think about it of, well, I don't have anything extra. Maybe not, but it's what you don't have to overcome or knock down to get to where everybody else is. I was going to say something else. I think folks are maybe thinking about, okay, what's my takeaway, or what do I do? I think that's one of the questions here is recommendations. I think a recommendation is to advocate for the time and the space to do the work. We acknowledge there's a lot of statements of acknowledgement that have come out in the past year that, we acknowledge privilege, we acknowledge systemic barriers. And if we acknowledge it, then how do we acknowledge it and provide time and space to do it? Where is the time and the space that's part of our roles to learn, to process, to change systems, to really look deeply at the way that we operate business? Because a lot of times it's, we ask good questions, but there isn't the time to discuss or to dig in and to make changes. It's easier, right? It's just easier to go with the status quo, because if you do nothing, the world will just keep operating just fine for most of us. But it's taking the time to ask those tough questions and having that time to be able to do it. And so I think advocating for that as a 5% or a whatever is part of duties to serve the students that you serve.
Thank you, Steve. And I know, Becca, you were about to say something as well.
Yeah, and Steve really, I think, covered it. And that's what I think that's the thing that I would want to leave the group with, is that, and what Susan was saying about rigging experiences, is that really what that is all pointing is that the system was created for a certain set of students, a certain group of students, your typical student that you thought of going to college back in the 70s and 80s, which was middle upper income white students whose families could support them. And exactly what Steve was saying is we need to be thinking about, how can we change the whole system so we don't have to create these programs and these emergency grants to get them through? How can we just make a system, again, where it works for them? And so I was really happy to be invited to this panel and to see just such amazing people in positions of power and just working throughout the U of M that have these students on the forefront of their mind and are advocating for them, because really systems are made just by small decisions and actions over time, so they can be changed that same way. So exactly what Steve was saying is just being in consultation with those ideas and using whatever place you have and privilege you have to be pushing back and trying to make those small changes that will lead to a greater impact overall.
Wait, did you just
Sorry, Sarah, yes.
Oh, yeah, just one last, right, seeing this work, in supporting students as really a shared responsibility and not just, so it's like meet new colleagues, staff and faculty, we're all responsible for kind of connecting to each other, meeting, not just saying like, okay, student, go to the trio or go to PES or go here, but like really connecting with colleagues across campus so we can continue supporting students because we have the honor and responsibility.
Thank you.
And if I could just, because this is such a huge thing, trust is a huge, huge issue with this population. They have been worked over by the system their whole lives. And that right there, you can't just tell them to walk across campus and go somewhere they aren't going to trust they're going to get help, because quite frankly, half the time they don't.
Yeah, thank you. Those are all really great points. Kayla, one final comment, and then I'll let them get their break.
Just reiterating it, if you can direct them to a person, like a direct person, when we're back on campus, if you can walk them there, do it. Yes, that's it.
Yeah, thank you. So again, thank you, Sarah, Becca, Kayla, Susan, Steve, for your contributions to this topic today, and for those attending. Please go to the Jamboard. If there's like lingering still questions or thoughts, add those on there. Can't guarantee we'll get them answered, but we will start processing and figuring out ways to incorporate them in future first gen institutes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for presenting and sharing this information with us. On behalf of all the attendees, I know that we truly appreciate it. Please continue to add your thoughts to the Jamboard and in the chat. Thank you again all for attending, and I'm just really excited to see all of the reflections on the Jamboard.
Thank you.
Thank you.